The smell of smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating. Flames crackled, consuming the wrecked police car as chaos unfolded on the street. People stood frozen, watching in shock, unsure of what to do. But Jordan didn't hesitate. His heart pounded as he ran toward the burning vehicle, his mind racing. He could hear the faint sound of someone coughing inside. There was no time to think, only time to act. The windshield was shattered, the metal twisted from the crash. Jordan yanked at the jammed door, ignoring the heat radiating from the fire. Inside, a police officer was slumped over the steering wheel, barely conscious. Smoke filled the car, and the flames were spreading fast. Jordan reached in, gripping the officer's arm. "Come on, stay with me," he urged, his voice strained. With one final pull, he managed to drive the officer out just as the fire intensified. The heat was unbearable, and his arms ached, but he refused to let go. The moment they hit the pavement, a loud explosion rocked the air. The car was gone, engulfed in flames. Sirens wailed in the distance as paramedics and firefighters rushed in. Jordan sat on the ground, catching his breath, watching as they carried the officer to safety. He had no idea who the man was. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't do it for a reward. He just did what felt right. The next morning, as he tried to shake off the intensity of the night before, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello." A deep voice came through the line. "Is this Jordan Matthews?" His stomach tightened. "Yes, who's this?" The voice paused for a moment before speaking again. "This is about what happened last night. We need to meet. It's important." Jordan's grip tightened on the phone. He had saved a life, but somehow it felt like his was about to change forever. Jordan's mind raced as he gripped his phone tighter. The voice on the other end was firm, controlled, but there was something else, urgency. He took a breath, steadying himself. "Who exactly am I speaking to?" he asked, trying to sound calm. There was another pause. "Detective Harris, NYPD," the man finally said. "We need to talk about last night." Jordan's heart pounded. He had assumed the whole thing was over. He saved a cop, the paramedics took over, and that was it. So why was a detective calling him now? "All right," he said cautiously. "Where do you want to meet?" "Come to the precinct." 30 minutes, the detective instructed before the line went dead. Jordan sat there for a moment, staring at his phone. Something didn't feel right. But he wasn't the type to back down from anything. He grabbed his jacket and headed out. The city moved as if nothing had happened the night before. People rushing to work, cars honking, life going on. But for Jordan, something had shifted. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, pulling the officer from the wreck, the explosion, the way the man had barely muttered a word before being taken away. Had he been in worse shape than he realized? When he arrived at the precinct, the front desk officer barely looked at him before pointing him toward an office in the back. The door was open, and behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his late 40s, sharp eyes studying Jordan as he walked in. "Matthews," the detective said, motioning for him to sit. Jordan took the chair, keeping his expression neutral. "What's this about?" Harris leaned forward. "The officer you saved. His name is Daniel Cole. He's been with the force for 20 years. But last night's crash, it wasn't an accident." Jordan felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought he was just in the right place at the right time. But now it seemed like he had stepped into something much bigger than he ever could have imagined. Jordan's hands instinctively clenched as he processed the detective's words. "Not an accident." He repeated, his voice low. "What are you saying?" Harris studied him carefully before leaning back in his chair. "We believe Officer Cole was targeted. Someone wanted him dead." Jordan's mind flashed back to the burning car, the way the officer had been barely conscious when he pulled him out. The crash had looked bad, but it never crossed his mind that it could have been deliberate. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "I was just some guy on the street who helped." The detective exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "Because Cole asked for you." Jordan blinked. "What?" Harris nodded. This morning, he regained consciousness for a short time. First thing he said was your name. A strange chill ran through Jordan. He didn't know this man. He had never met him before that night. So why would he ask for him? "That doesn't make any sense," Jordan said, shaking his head. "We're trying to piece that together," Harris admitted. "But there's more. The accident, if we can even call it that, was no random hit. The brakes were tampered with, and before the crash, Cole had been working a high-profile case. Something big." Jordan frowned. "What kind of case?" The detective hesitated before reaching into his desk and pulling out a folder. He slid it across the desk. "Corruption," Harris said. Internal Affairs suspected a group of officers were involved in something dirty. Cole was investigating them. And then this happened. Jordan opened the folder, scanning the pages. Names, reports, dates. He didn't understand most of it, but one thing was clear. Whoever had tried to take out Cole wasn't done yet. A knock on the door made them both turn. A uniformed officer stepped in, a grim expression on his face. "Sir, we have a problem." Harris sighed. "What now?" The officer's eyes flicked to Jordan before back to the detective. "Officer Cole, he's missing." Jordan felt his stomach drop. Whatever he had stumbled into was far from over. Jordan felt the weight of the officer's words settle deep in his chest. "Missing? How does someone just disappear from a hospital bed?" He turned to Harris, expecting him to have an answer, but the detective looked just as tense. "When did this happen?" Harris demanded, standing abruptly. "Less than an hour ago," the officer replied. "Security footage shows 2 men in scrubs entering his room. They wheeled him out like a patient transfer, but the hospital has no record of it. By the time staff realized something was off, they were gone." Jordan exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "This isn't random," he muttered. "If someone wanted him dead, they would have finished the job. But taking him, they need something from him." Harris nodded. "Or they don't want him talking." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Jordan didn't know why, but something about all of this was getting personal. He had never met Officer Cole before last night, and yet he was tangled in this mess. A cop targeted for investigating corruption, an attempted murder disguised as an accident, and now a full-blown abduction. None of it made sense, except that whoever was behind it had power. Harris grabbed his coat. "We don't have time to sit around. We need to find out what Cole knew that got him in trouble." His eyes flicked to Jordan. "You're already involved, whether you like it or not. If you want answers, come with me." Jordan hesitated for half a second before standing. He had no choice. They arrived at Cole's apartment 20 minutes later. Harris jimmied the lock with practiced ease, and they stepped inside. The place was a mess, not in a ransacked way, but in the way of a man who had been living on edge. Papers were scattered across the table, an open laptop hummed on the desk. Jordan walked over, scanning documents while Harris checked the rest of the apartment. A name kept appearing in the files, one Jordan didn't recognize. But just as he was about to ask Harris about it, the detective reappeared, his face tight. "We need to go. Now." Jordan barely had time to react before the lights in the apartment cut out, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Jordan's pulse quickened as the footsteps outside the apartment grew louder. Someone was coming. Harris grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the back of the apartment. "We're not sticking around to find out who that is," he muttered. Just as they reached the kitchen, the front door burst open. Heavy boots stomped inside, followed by hushed voices. Jordan held his breath, pressing himself against the wall. Harris motioned for him to stay quiet as he peeked around the corner. Jordan could see the shadows moving in the dim light, at least 3 men, all moving with precision, searching. They weren't here to steal anything. They were looking for something or someone. The laptop. Jordan's heart pounded. The files on the desk must have held something important, something dangerous. He exchanged a glance with Harris, who nodded toward the back window. Their only way out. Slowly, they moved. Jordan carefully lifted the window as quietly as he could, but the old frame let out a sharp creak. Instantly, the footsteps in the apartment stopped. A voice barked an order. "They're still here." Jordan didn't wait. He hoisted himself up and dropped to the alley below. Harris close behind. The second their feet hit the pavement, shouts erupted from inside. The men were coming after them. "Run," Harris yelled. They sprinted down the alley, weaving between dumpsters and parked cars. Jordan's lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He didn't know who those men were, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't regular cops. Harris led them toward an unmarked car parked at the curb. Just as they reached it, gunfire rang out, shattering the back window. Jordan dove behind the vehicle as Harris pulled out his weapon and fired back. "We can't stay here," Jordan hissed. Harris scanned the area and spotted an opening. A crowded street just a block away. "We make it to that crowd, we disappear." Jordan nodded. They exchanged a quick look before taking off again. But just as they neared safety, tires screeched, and a black SUV cut them off. The doors flew open, and before Jordan could react, a masked figure grabbed him and shoved him inside. The last thing he saw before the door slammed shut was Harris turning to fight. And then everything went black. Jordan's head throbbed as he slowly regained consciousness. The world around him was spinning, the dull hum of an engine filling his ears. His hands were bound, his wrists sore from the tight restraints. He was in the back of the black SUV, speeding down an unknown road. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help him now. Across from him sat a man in a suit, his face partially hidden in the dim light of the car. He wasn't one of the masked men who had grabbed him. He was someone else, someone in charge. Jordan's gut told him this was bigger than he ever imagined. "You should have walked away," the man said, his voice smooth but cold. "You had no idea what you stumbled into, did you?" Jordan didn't respond. His mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. The files, the attempted cover-up, the attack at the apartment, none of it made sense. What was so important that people were willing to kill to keep it hidden? The man leaned forward slightly. "That cop you saved, he wasn't supposed to live." Jordan's breath caught. He had suspected something was off, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. The accident, it wasn't an accident at all. Someone had tried to kill Officer Harris, and Jordan had unknowingly interfered. Before he could process it, the SUV jerked to a sudden stop. The driver cursed, and the doors flew open. In the chaos, Jordan caught a glimpse of flashing lights, police, real ones. Someone had found them. Gunshots erupted as masked men scrambled to escape. Jordan ducked low, his hands still tied, as officers swarmed the scene. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Harris." Jordan turned to see the officer, bruised but alive, fighting his way through the commotion. Their eyes met for a brief second before Harris lunged toward the SUV and yanked the door open. Without hesitation, he cut Jordan's restraints. "We need to go," Harris said urgently. But Jordan wasn't ready to run. He turned back to the suited man, who was now being restrained by officers. Their eyes locked, and the man smirked. "This isn't over," he muttered. Jordan knew he was right. He had uncovered something far bigger than a simple case of corruption, and now he was part of it. Jordan sat in the police station, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The night's events still played in his mind: being kidnapped, the shocking truth about Harris' accident, and the dramatic rescue. It felt surreal. Across from him, Officer Harris leaned back in his chair, his face still bruised but his expression calm. He had been through worse, but even he admitted this case was unlike anything he had ever seen. "The guy in the suit, he's connected to something bigger," Harris said, rubbing his temple. "We're still digging, but the corruption runs deep. If you hadn't stepped in that night, I wouldn't be here right now." Jordan shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." Harris gave him a knowing look. Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger. As dawn began to break, an officer approached with an update. The men involved in the attack were being questioned, and the case was already making headlines. The deeper the investigation went, the more disturbing the truth became. It wasn't just about one cop's attempted murder. It was about a web of crime that had been hidden for years. And Jordan had unknowingly blown it open. Before he left, Harris placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You saved me, and in doing so, you saved a lot of others. Whatever happens next, don't let them scare you into silence." Jordan nodded. He had never asked to be part of this, but now that he was, he wouldn't back down. As he stepped out of the station, the morning sun felt different, warmer, brighter. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: his life had changed forever.